So welcome back to another episode of LifeSci AI, the podcast series. Today, we are joined by the CEO of Blackford Analysis, Ben Panter. Blackford Analysis are based in Edinburgh and are a software platform utilising and trying to simplify the use of products within the healthcare domain. But I'm sure there's a lot more to the story of Ben and Blackford Analysis. So I'll leave it over to Ben now to properly introduce himself, a little bit about his background and Blackford. But welcome to the podcast, Ben. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here. So I think your question really was, how did I get to the point where we started Blackford? I spent 8 years as an astronomer through a PhD, various fellowships, building an algorithm along with my supervisor that accelerated the process of trying to understand the galaxy from its spectra. So taking the light, splitting it into its different constituents, different colors, wavelengths, and trying to model that very quickly. And the process that we developed took processing of a galaxy down from 8 hours or so down to about a minute. And that, combined with a huge survey of millions of galaxies called the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, allowed us to build the star formation record of the whole universe and get some interesting insights about when big galaxies and small galaxies formed their stars. And that was great. It was a paper that was published in Nature and spawned all sorts of pieces. But I kind of knew that I wanted to take this technology and do something a bit more relevant with it. You can spend your life studying galaxies, but they tend not to give you much back. And the question really was, okay, well, we've got this cool technology. Where could we use it? And that really kicked off an interest in the commercial side as well as the technology side. Right. Because quite often you solve a problem with a great piece of technology, but you're not really solving a problem that has value to someone. So we looked at taking this technology and putting it into seismology, where you go off and you survey the subsea oil reserves in the North Sea, and then you come back and you have to process this data, and we could really accelerate the processing of that data. And you think that sounds fantastic, but actually the data sits in a warehouse for 2 years before it's ever processed, so it's not time critical, and no one's going to pay you to accelerate a process that doesn't need accelerating. We looked at mobile phones, and back then GSM was the standard, and it turns out that GSM is still pretty much the standard for mobile phone data, so we weren't going to make much progress there. And then we looked at banking, and this was 2007, when it was still a good idea to have rocket science and banking kind of added together. 2008 came along, and that really wasn't a great plan. But we'd had some interest from a group of medical physicists at the Western General here in Edinburgh. And they had a cohort of patients that they called the Lothian cohort, which is basically a group of people who'd had an MR scan every year for about 20 years. And this was an incredibly rich data set that showed neurodegeneration. So what's happening to people's brains as they age, what's a normal rate of degeneration, and what's a rate associated with a particular condition, Alzheimer's or whatever else. And the first thing they had to do was line up the data set that they got this year with the data set that they got last year. And that was taking them 20 minutes or so for each data set. So it was a big laborious process. And they said, well, it would be great if you could just speed that up. I said, well, that sounds interesting. Let's see what we can do. We got some money from Scottish Enterprise, still as an academic, built an algorithm that could do this process in about a second. And the medical physicists were delighted. And they said, we should show this to the radiologists. And the radiologists said, well, this is really great, but do you think you could do it in our normal workflow? Could you make our clinical processes like this just as quick? Because fundamentally, if you're a radiologist, you're looking for what has changed in an image. It got better, worse, or stayed the same. And that really was what 11 years ago persuaded us to start the company and initiate Blackford, and the rest, from there, happy to talk about. But that was the kind of the backstory to Blackford and how we came to set the company up.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't realize you sort of were approached by a group of clinicians in Scotland, and sort of, how did they get in touch with you? Did they see your paper in the
No, I mean, we were busy trying to understand where this technology could be useful.
Right.
And we had a long list of organizations or areas that involved lots of data and needed to have results quickly. And it was a hunch, really, that we could go and talk to these people, and they turned out to be friendly, and on we went.
Yeah.
And I think the key piece that we got from that, though, is that you don't necessarily understand what problems people really experience until you sit by their side. So in the case of the radiologists, it was sitting in the reading room with them and seeing they'd bring up the prior image, they'd bring up the current study, they'd bring up another prior, they'd hunt and peck around to try and find the linkage. And it was only really once we'd got into that deep understanding of how they actually did their job that we were able to see that maybe this technology would be useful in a certain way. And I think I hope it's not just us. I think it's a common problem when you're trying to transfer technology from one area to another, that really having to get to grips with understanding the reality of the problem rather than what you think is the problem. I remember lots of coffee time chats in academia about, oh, well, the world must be this way, and if only they did it this way, it would solve every problem. And of course, when you're actually tackling reality, when you're getting out of the lab, when you're actually trying to understand what the real problem is, you realize it's quite different. And I think that's been very useful as we've developed the company over the years, to really go back to that first principle of what is it that the customer needs you to do, rather than what do you think they should be doing. And what do you think their problem is? Well, it might not be what you think it is.
Listening rather than imposing.
I mean, it's a balance, right? It's a conversation. In fact, it's many conversations, trying to see different ways of solving a particular problem, and just being open to compromise and understanding that you're not the authority on something. And I think that learning has really helped us a huge amount as we've developed Blackford, because we have a kind of different focus now, right? So we're a platform business now, and we're taking the learnings that we have of how difficult it was, both technically to deploy that algorithm into a workflow, and commercially to get all the way through all the processes in a hospital to be able to get it deployed and in use. And we recognized back in 2016 that this was something that was a really hard-won experience, and the deployed base that we had and were building at that time had potential to be able to be a route for many other products to get to market. And that's really when we did our kind of shift to being a platform for third-party applications, and to try and do everything we can to make efficient adoption of all these different AI technologies, clinical applications as we call them, into a radiology workflow, and to try and really homogenize and unify that process.
I see. Okay. So the algorithm then itself, how far did that go? Was that being used in clinical settings?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think currently we process, we're in about 800 sites now across the US, Australia, and New Zealand.
Wow.
With the platform, and the vast majority of the platform deployments that we have run that registration algorithm. It's called the Smart Localizer, or auto registration in some markets. But that's been a great success for Blackford, and really it's that deployed base that we leverage to accelerate the sales of all the third-party algorithms that we carry.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think the big shift for Blackford was originally we thought that we were building a platform that we would populate with our own products.
Yeah.
And the shift really is that we now have a platform that we populate with our own and other people's products.
Yeah, it's almost like, yes, so you saw the success, but then you also saw the problem that you have had in implementing this into the radiologist workflow, and thought, okay, we can solve this problem as well.
I think that the technical problem is important, absolutely. And back then we were just solving the problem of how do you get data out of a PACS quickly.
Yeah.
So PACS are there's a variety of capabilities. Some don't have, they're designed with a very specific purpose in mind, which is to store data, display most of it once to a radiologist, and then make sure that they've got that safely stored away in case it's ever needed in the future.
Yeah.
They're not designed to be able to fetch all sorts of data very quickly from different time points in a patient's history. So you'll have some prior images which are in kind of slower access storage that are maybe topologically further away. You have to solve those problems. And at that point, we considered the world as, how do you get data out of the PACS? We also then had to work out, how do you get the results useful for the radiologist? So you can't spin up a separate viewer, because that's not how radiologists read studies. They've got no interest in reading the study here and then trying to work out something over here and then looking at this screen. And it's got to be there in their existing workflow. So we had one of the first deep integrations into viewers for this kind of clinical application, algorithmic product AI, maybe you could call it that.
Yeah.
That you actually, from the existing user interface, you would click and something would happen. It would line up the prior studies.
Oh, I see.
Trying to do a huge amount of processing ahead of time, getting all the data in the right place, working out what the correct algorithm to apply is, because you want a different algorithm for the head or chest or whatever else. Fixing all of that ahead of time, such that when the radiologist opens their study, as if by magic, it's easier to read.
I see.
And I think that there's a temptation to go, look at our technology, it's great. You're going to want to spend your entire life just looking at this wonderful thing. And the response from the radiologist is, do you have any idea how many studies I have to read today? I don't have time to look at your bright, shiny widget. I just want to get on with my job.
Yeah.
And I think as long as you keep that in mind, and you really focus on what is it that drives productivity for the radiologist, that's a great way to think about the world. And if you're going to do that, you need to be integrated into the work list, you need to be integrated into the viewer, you need to be integrated into reporting, you need to be looking at downstream comms to the referring physician. And really all of that, so this is all in the kind of technology space.
Yeah.
And trying to think about how to homogenize all of those different components. And that's really what Blackford does, right? So from the technology perspective, we have all those hooks into all the different systems, and we make that a much more smooth experience for the radiologist, but also a smooth experience for the clinical application that wants to integrate into workflow.
Right, I see.
So that's the technology side.
Yeah.
But there's an even bigger problem that you have to solve as well. And that is, how on earth do you navigate the hospital processes to allow you to deploy such a product in their site? There's the initial marketing. How do you get in front of the right people in the hospital?
Yeah.
How do you work through their procurement cycle? How do you get the contract in place? There's all sorts of different terms, liabilities, business associate agreements to cover whether you can have the PHI or not. How do you deploy the hardware? Is it cloud? Is it on-premise? What are the information security constraints around doing that? What are the regulatory constraints on the product? How do you make sure that your indications for use are being appropriately communicated to the user? Training's taken place. And all of this means that, any individual hospital, especially in the US, could probably integrate one application a year, if you're lucky.
Right.
Now, if you've got a platform approach and you do the platform once, and remember, we've got to do all of those boxes to check off with the platform. Once you've done that, it's a very simple process to add more products in. So suddenly you're changing the entire economics, both from a hospital perspective and from a clinic perspective, of how you deploy product. And that's really the platform business model, right? That you move from being a kind of a technology plug-in point, which is handy, to being a complete solution that solves the problem, both for the radiologist, for the administration in the hospital, for the clinic provider, for the PACS admin. You know, you've got to solve for all of those stakeholders, and that's really that's what we do at Blackford.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and you said that would change in 2016.
So that was when we decided that
to go platform.
A platform approach was the right thing to do it. Initially, we were more focused on the technology side than the commercial side. You know, as we learned more and as we deployed more of our own product, that really was a shift to, it's not just a technology problem, it's a whole platform business approach.
And what was the catalyst for that? Was there a moment, or was there a few moments that you thought, hang on a minute, there's something, we can give something more than just a product here. We can give a platform and we can enable more people to have access to this. Was there a particular moment, or was there a group of moments that changed your thinking for that?
I think it was, you know, our first deployment of our original registration product. So that's the platform and the clinical application that does the I mean, it took us years to get all the alignment between the PACS vendors, to get their viewers in the right place, to get the 510K done for the regulatory status. And we were ready, and we were raring to go, and we were ready to deploy. And we got a hospital lined up that really wanted to use this product, and the energy was all there, everything was great. Right, let's get moving. Okay, well, you're gonna have to buy the servers, Blackford, because we need you to fund that. We'll find out what to buy the servers, right? Here's the servers that have been delivered. Okay. Right. Are they ready for us to log into yet? Oh, no, we've got to get IT to put them into the data center. All right, okay. They're in the data center, brilliant. So a month later, those servers, are they in the data center yet? Yeah, they are, but we need to put the operating system on. Oh, right, okay. A month later, the operating systems are great. Yeah, fantastic. Now, when do we log in? We need you to fill out this information security assessment. Oh, okay, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we'll fill it out. Get it back to them within a couple of days. Brilliant. How can we have access? Yeah, well, that will be reviewed in the next meeting of the Information Security Committee, which is in a month's time. Oh, right, okay. Okay, well, in a month's time, we come up. Oh, yeah, well, they wanted some clarity on this question here. Oh, and the process goes on and on and on. And in the end, our first deployment took 13 months to go from customer saying, yes, we want to do this, to, yeah, actually, we're now live and the product is working.
Wow.
And that was a particular scenario where they were in the middle of changing their EMR, and IT was backed up. And, you know, it was something that we were doing as a kind of a, if you trial the product, we'll so, but the amount of learning in that process, that you're not live until you're actually live, and the timescales there. And now we're down to, I think the record is a couple of weeks.
Right? Oh, wow. Yeah.
And there's various ways that you can achieve that kind of speed. One of them is working through a channel partner where the legals are already in place.
Yeah.
But I think that just that recognition that it's immensely complex if you've not been through that route before.
Yeah.
And there are many gotchas along the way that if you've done it a few times, or a few hundred times, you've got the experience to be able to go, I think this is going to happen, so we ought to go around that way instead.
Yeah.
Or we've chatted to them and they prefer on-premise to cloud, or they're very open to cloud and their preferred provider is that vendor rather than that vendor. And making sure that you have the inherent flexibility to be able to respond to those kind of requests is absolutely key.
Right, I see.
And also, when you're writing your security questionnaire, having things like ISO standards, having the various different stock answers that you know to give, make things a lot smoother as a process.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, but why? Some people would think, okay, it's been 13 months, and now we know the complexity of this. We know the process. We can then use this for our benefit to increase capacity for our product, so that the next time that we put it into a hospital, it's quicker, it goes live quicker. Okay, cool. And the next one's quicker, and then the next one's quicker, and we just place our product in better and quicker. What particularly was it about yourselves that thought, okay, we can not only help our product and our algorithm, but we can help the third parties as well?
Sure. Without getting misty-eyed, right? This is about the time when two little letters started appearing all over the place, A and I, and I think we went from being one of 5 or 6 vendors at RSNA that had something that you did an algorithm that or an AI method, whatever you want to call it, that enabled you to deliver some useful result to a radiologist. I mean, this was when advanced visualization was really going through its dramatic consolidation. When I first went to RSNA in 2007, I think it was, there were about 20 different advanced visualization vendors. Now, I think you'd see Vital, TerraRecon, yeah, I'm struggling, right? Okay, so that was the big wave that was kind of hitting. CAD was a big thing, but that was kind of commenting at the time as well. And really, we then had a period where you'd have the likes of Blackford, Fovea, various other entities that were supporting channels, building product. But the big change was AI came, and in the first year there were maybe 10 vendors there, and we thought, well, this is interesting, let's see where this goes. Then there were 40, then there were 80. The year 2019, just before the pandemic, there were 129, right?
Jeez.
And all of these entities were going to face the same problems as we did.
Yeah.
The misty-eyed bit is that I think that patients, clinicians, radiologists, healthcare economics in general can all massively benefit from AI. And the only way that that's going to happen is if you can actually get it adopted at scale in healthcare.
Yeah.
And that just isn't feasible if you're going algorithm by algorithm, company by company. And actually, I mean, I passionately believe that AI has tremendous potential to solve huge problems for healthcare.
Yeah.
But it won't happen unless we can find an efficient way to deploy at scale.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what a platform business is all about, right? So yes, I'm commercial as well. I would like to make money on that. But I think that the absolute focus is that it's the only way that you can deploy the level of AI that you need to make an impact on the problems that healthcare has.
Yeah.
So like I said, there's a danger that you get misty-eyed there, but that's the real driver for me. How do you get this stuff adopted?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Especially you've seen the growth of it then firsthand, because you work with these guys. You are their platform for a lot of them. So you are almost like an enabler, but also an innovator because you come from that background. You had a product in the first instance.
Knowing the challenges that you face.
Yeah, for sure. So how did your business adapt, and what changes did you need to implement going from being just a product? When I say just a product, like it's no small feat to get what you're to.
I'm not in any way offended. It's fine.
From a product to a product plus platform. What did you need to do? How did you need to change your setup, your hierarchies, your structure, and your focus? How did you enable that change?
Sure. I'd say that gradually is probably the right answer. You know,
Mhm.
we started off working with a few partners just to explore what we needed to do to work with their products. I think the first year at RSNA we showed 5 or 6 products, some of which remain on the platform now, some of which the companies have either folded or gone their separate ways.
Mm.
But you have to start looking for patterns. So what are the features that you need as a platform that meet the kind of 80-20 rule? So what is it that you can do with a small number of features that deliver most of the value that you would have from an app with its own interface or its own integration route or whatever else? And then you expand from that and you try and work out whether there are some edge cases there. So that's the kind of product stuff. And I mean, at the moment we're expanding our product team to really try and address that further.
Yeah.
The other thing that you need to do is get better at the capacity of how do you move all the marketing materials around, how do you keep everybody up to date? So we do a lot of our sales through channel partners. So we enable large companies who wish to have a platform, and some of them are branded Blackford and some of them are branded by that company itself, to be able to take product to market and to have access to that huge complexity of products that we sit behind it. So there's a level of just managing all the partnerships to bring the right materials at the right time, to make sure that the software is up to date, to make sure that any contract amendments and pricing is propagated through. So it becomes a really big administrative task just to keep everything up to date and keep everything smooth, because the fundamental piece is that you can't have special cases, right?
Yeah.
If you said that the limit of indemnity is this much, it's got to be this much for all of the partners on that side, because you can't say, well, except for that product, which is this, and for that one.
Yeah.
So there's a huge effort in homogenizing and trying to make sure that we're delivering something that's at the level the market needs.
I see.
On the regulatory side, just being really cautious that we've got all the bits and pieces lined up, and what territories and what areas you can use the product, whether the pricing changes around different territories. It's just a really complicated picture, because you've got to have all that complexity on the back end to be able to provide a very simple solution at the front.
Yeah.
So I guess that's an element of it. I mean, from an engineering perspective, the focus moved away from image analysis, but we still do a fair amount of image analysis. We still have that registration product that's still being updated and expanded.
Yeah.
To, okay, from a platform perspective, what do we need to do to integrate into worklist, into reporting, into the viewer pieces? How do we get the right element of a viewer that isn't necessarily standalone, that fits within the PACS viewer?
Yeah.
And that change in mindset is quite key. I think the other thing is just understanding the economics of scaling a business like that.
Yeah.
That you've got to be aware that you can't go out and take 100 million of investment, because actually you need to make sure that there's something in the pie for everybody. The ecosystem only works if the ClinApp provider, the channel, Blackford, the customer are all getting value out of the arrangement. And it's just a constant balancing act, really.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that's interesting. So you obviously still have that image analysis work that you do, but there was almost a shift into more of a business case, economics case, and understanding the systems and the compliance and the locations as well. That's probably the differentiator between the two. If you look at the companies now to 10 years ago or 7 years ago, that's probably, is that the difference you would say?
Yeah, I think that if you, I have a kind of simplistic picture in my mind of how information and knowledge exists within this AI ecosystem.
Yeah.
So at the bottom, we've got the underlying AI techniques.
Yeah.
And the absolute cutting edge AI techniques are available for free in libraries that you can download and get working with almost immediately. And the advent of really powerful GPUs and the fact that you can buy them by the cycle in the cloud means that there isn't really a tech barrier to entry anymore. It's all out there, it's available, it costs money, but it's not huge amounts. And then you look at data and you think, well, okay, there's actually, it's harder to get to data. You can't get much of it for free. But if you're working with a clinical partner, then there is plenty of reasonably well curated data. And it's a tractable problem to start labeling that. You can do that with, there are former radiologists that are happy to work along that line. It's not an impossible problem. It costs money, but again, it's not impossible.
Yeah.
You then get up to the clinical problem, where, you need to talk to a clinician. You need to be able to think from a product management mindset about what is it that they really want. So a bit harder, but still not impossible. But then you get to the really hard bits. And one of those, the first one will be workflow integration, right? So if you want to go out to all the different PACS vendors and all the different worklist vendors and all the different reporting vendors, and you want to get their attention such that you can build an integration with them, that takes years, right? And you have to sometimes go direct and sometimes find a way around, and sometimes you write some kind of patchy solution that will manage to get you in to where you need to be. But that workflow integration isn't something that you can just buy, right? It's years of experience, years of solving those problems, understanding that two different hospitals or health systems with identical IT kit may need you to do things in a very different way. So building in huge amounts of flexibility that, okay, we have 5 ways to solve this problem. We'll try 1 through 4, and well, then we have to move to 5. Or the particular focus of this organization is on this topic, therefore we have to be very cognizant of that, and we have to prioritize that against this. Or it's a distributed PACS, and we need to be aware that that archive doesn't necessarily have to talk to that archive, so we can do separate channel. Just all these things that you learn over loads of deployments. But the real pinnacle of this pyramid, the piece where there really isn't much experience in the world, is trying to understand a business case for adoption of AI in a health system.
Yeah.
And you look at I guess Viz, Rapid AI, maybe Heartflow, and those are the ones that have managed to get sustainable business growth. And really, that's about stroke and stroke care, and Heartflow for cardiac assessments. Now, in radiology itself, it's hard to point to a company that's really got that level of scale. And I think that's the piece that for the AI ecosystem, it's the most valuable piece of knowledge, right? So, and Blackford's in a great position because we really aggregate all of our understanding, selling all sorts of different products to really focus in on how do we understand how to get that business case for adoption going in healthcare.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, that's kind of the secret sauce for Blackford, right? And I can't tell you the nuts and bolts. That's really where we focus our energies.
And I guess probably the reason why you are in such a sweet spot is because people who are making these AI companies and AI medical devices, most of them haven't done it before. It's been around for 5 years, 6 years, mainly when we're at a product stage. So, especially in the imaging piece. So I guess that's probably the area in which they need the most help and they need the most support. And the idea that you have aggregated and focused your efforts on becoming as experienced as possible in as many different environments and locations and platforms and needs of the customer to enable them to do that, it's absolutely fascinating. And I think I know there'll be more Blackfords in looking at different locations, more people like Blackford coming along, but it definitely seems like you are there almost as like the petrol or the electricity almost to be more sustainable for the adoption of AI in healthcare systems?
I mean, there's a plethora of marketplaces and entities that would claim to do this platform piece, and some of them do a reasonable job of hooking things up to the PACS, and collating a load of different algorithms that you say, right, here we are, bam, here's a marketplace and a platform. But I think that the challenge then is, okay, well, what value are you really adding if you can't integrate to a work list, if you can't integrate into reporting, if you can't get all of those connections right?
It's the extra step that you have.
And then on top of that, the commercial piece of it's great that you have a huge library of all these different applications, but why should I buy any of them, right? What is it that makes a difference to me as a hospital or a health system that says, yeah, okay, this actually makes sense. I can see how this fits in there and how this will make me more efficient, how that will effectively make me, right? So everybody in healthcare wants patient outcomes to improve. But healthcare margins are very small, right? If you want to be able to deploy a technology that will improve patient outcomes, you have to be able to explain to the hospital why they should buy that product and how they will make it. And that's just a sad reality. And this is why I'm so passionate about finding ways to make it more efficient to get products into the market and into use. Because if we don't find a way to do it, AI in healthcare, AI in medical imaging is going to wither on the vine.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, gosh, just from my background in politics at university, there was that famous quote of when America gained independence. I was like, we all hang together, we all hang separately. The founding fathers, that kind of mentality, we all have to be in it together. We all have to work together, which is really nice to see, because we all have to make this case. And this is part of the podcast as well, right? Like, this is why we do this, these things, to show off what we do as an industry, how we use AI as an industry, not only to knit each other together, but also to show off around the world, actually, this is the super cool stuff that life sciences are doing with AI. It's how we're utilizing it. These are our challenges, but this is how we're overcoming it. And these are the cool companies that you can be connected with to achieve that. The one thing you said 5-10 minutes ago about patterns, and you have to be aware of the patterns to enable you to have the 80-20 split with your features in your platform, right? So what patterns are you seeing that have come in the past year, post-COVID potentially, and how do you see them manifesting themselves in the next 12, 24, 36 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a general shift towards telemedicine across the world, which is entirely justified by not wanting to be in the same room as the patient if you don't have to be. And I think that the big impact on that has been acceptance through necessity of cloud processing. And I think if you look to the US and you look at some massive health systems, I mean, Intermountain, MedStar, they're going for a effectively entirely cloud-based PACS, right? Which is the viewer and the storage. And that's, I mean, I can't imagine that would have been on the horizon 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think that healthcare in general has been fairly slow in adopting cloud technology.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's a big fundamental shift, and it's pretty exciting because it allows the deployment of AI products to be somewhat smoother, because you're not trying to spin up. You still need something as an edge device within the hospital. But you can then look at, okay, how do we deliver this stuff with exotic GPU requirements, or basically you need to be able to spin up something that's 20 cores, but you only need it for 10 minutes and you only need it once a day. I think that really, it opens up all sorts of interesting opportunities for AI, especially in medicine. we're not there yet, right? There's still changes that when you look at a site and you see they've gone full cloud, it's pretty exciting, and you go, oh, that's interesting, that's a bold move. but honestly, I think that is going to become the way that things happen, right? So over the next few years, you'll see initially all the PACS vendors moving towards cloud solutions. And you know, Blackford, we're already there, right? Our platform can be deployed in the cloud, can be deployed on premise. But the big change that we're seeing is that sites are more open to being cloud first, rather than saying, yeah, we'll think about that in the future. And for me, that's one of the big changes of the pandemic. It's just that there's a recognition that there are advantages to not having everything consolidated within a data center within a hospital.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's so do you think how far ahead have we accelerated then? Has it been maybe a 5-year acceleration, a couple of years acceleration, or can you not really tell at this stage?
I don't know. I mean, I guess healthcare has caught up with the rest of the world. Yeah. And I don't mean that in a disparaging sense, right? The reasons that healthcare was slow to adopt the cloud are entirely reasonable. Yeah, for sure. You've got to have a focus on protecting PHI, of ensuring that patient confidentiality is guaranteed. We only need to look at the ransomware attacks and all that kind of thing. That it's a massive responsibility that is on the IT teams in hospitals. Yeah. But and you mix that with the huge other responsibilities that they have as well, right? Yeah. And it takes something as significant as the pandemic to be the trigger that says, okay, we have to drop everything and achieve this. But once you've achieved this, you kind of go, oh, well, there's all sorts of other things that we could do, and why would we go back to the old way? Yeah. So I don't know that we've leapt forward. I think we've caught the rest of the world up. I see. But getting over that sense that all the data has to sit within the hospital walls forever, I think getting over that perspective, that unlocks a huge amount to just keep up with the world now, rather than kind of falling behind. Yeah, no, I don't know. Like I said, I'm very careful not to disparage the IT teams in hospitals, because they have a immense task and an immense responsibility. But I think that the step to being open to cloud has been a very positive one. Yeah, no, for sure. So I think the conversations that we have and the development of products, the conversation is all about how can we further scale? How can we further democratize? How can we increase access? And it all points to the cloud. So I for one, and I'm very excited to see now the impact of widespread adoption of the cloud, and what that means for AI adoption, what it means for product development, and sort of the increased accessibility and scalability and usability focus now of these AI products. But Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Really fascinating in terms of the platform model and how you guys work at Blackford. And I guess really one thing I'd love to know from people listening is, what impact do you guys think cloud, the uptake of cloud will have on AI medical devices? But from yourself, Ben, I'd love to get you back on in maybe 12, 24 months time, and talk about the post-COVID patterns and see if what actual impacts there were. If you'd like to come on later on as well. But thank you for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. My pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Ben. Okay.